right, welcome everybody to our second edition of Voyage Fromage Cheese Club and Experience. My name is Julia. I am the owner of Formaggio Kitchen and very happy to welcome you to our club this month, which is going to be centered around the theme of farmhouse cheeses. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. And we do have a very special guest with us tonight, one of the cheese makers of one of the cheeses you're enjoying tonight. And so that is going to be a fantastic treat. But before we get started, this is meant to be for you. And so if you have any questions at all during the presentation, feel free to unmute yourself. You can also use the chat box. Whatever you want to do, if there's a term that I am mentioning that you may not understand or know, just give me a shout. We want everybody to have a nice accessibility to what we're talking about. So I assume everybody has all of their cheeses laid out in front of you. I'm going to just quickly go over the order of the cheese. Awesome. Michael and Alan, thank you. That's a nice setup. All right, so we are going to start tonight with the Manchego, Via d'Aro. The second cheese we're doing tonight is the Cato Corner Aged Bloomsday. The third cheese we are going to be doing tonight is the Pitchfork Cheddar. And I know a lot of the cheeses look very similar, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the very last cheese we're doing tonight is the Borencast Grand Cru, so our aged Gouda. So that's the order in which we're going to be talking about these cheeses. And just really quickly, I know a lot of you, lots of familiar faces from previous virtual events, but Formaggio Kitchen, just a brief kind of synopsis about what we do. We work one-on-one with producers. We try our best to work directly with producers, and that enables us to have relationships and information and access to the most incredible products in the world. One of our specialties is importing products into the United States for the first time. So a huge part of what we do is we help these small producers get registered with the FDA, and we work on the process. And there's a lot of, seeking involved and a lot of travel to find these tiny producers that are very representative of their region, of traditional cheese making or traditional food practices in their area. And so what we at Formaggio Kitchen like to do is to find those producers that are really highlighting kind of the beauty of producing a food product naturally and bringing it to the United States. And so we actually have a couple cheeses or one cheese tonight that's exclusive to us in the US. And I think that's a good starting point to start talking about the Via d'Aro Manchego. So we are going to start with that cheese. And I had the pleasure of meeting the cheesemaker, Maria, in Madrid. It was actually earlier this year. And so Maria is a third generation cheesemaker. Her grandmother started the farm, and she started with 150 sheep. And so when we talk about the theme of tonight, you're going to see a common thread. And so the theme is farmhouse cheeses. And so what does that mean? That means cheeses that are made using the milk from the animals on the farm. So essentially the farmers are the people making the cheese. And at Formaggio Kitchen, a lot of times we talk about minimizing the number of hands that a product passes through before it gets to the consumer. And this is taking that extra step where not only are you raising the animals, you're milking the animals, you are making that cheese, and in some cases actually aging the cheese. And the whole purpose of Voyage Fromage is to kind of dig a little deeper into some of these themes. And so what's really interesting is that different countries and different regions in the world have different kind of definitions of what farmhouse is. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit tonight. Interestingly, there's not really sort of a true term for farmhouse cheeses for Manchego. It's or Spanish cheeses in general. So this Manchego is very unique in many different ways. First of all, it is a raw milk Manchego. Traditionally, a lot of Manchegos tend to be really, really large production, and the scale in which the production is really has a massive impact on the quality of the milk and whether or not you need to pasteurize your milk. And so with Maria, she dedicated her basically her entire career to producing this incredible high quality unpasteurized Manchego cheese. And beyond that, when you talk about Manchego cheese, and raise your hand, I've got a lot of videos on, raise your hand if you've had Manchego cheese before. So I'm seeing lots and lots of hands raised. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Vicki. I'm seeing lots of hands raised. Manchego has become a bit more of a commodity cheese in a lot of ways, but there are still artisanal producers focused on the traditional cheese making aspects of Manchego. And so Maria does not speak very good English, and but she really wanted to share without using her voice. I offered to translate, but we have a video that she created actually this past week because she really wanted to share a little bit about her farm with you. So I'm going to start playing that so that you can get an idea as we taste the cheese. You can see her farm and you can see what, so this is, of course, not hers, but these are her sheep. So she, as I mentioned, she started with 150 sheep, or her grandmother did, and she's actually built it up quite a lot. So they have about 6,000 sheep now, so quite a lot larger. And to be considered Manchego cheese, you have to be in the region of La Mancha in Spain, which is really dead center in Spain, just south of Madrid. And you have to use Manchega sheep. So this is what we're talking about. The Castilla-La Mancha is the only region in the world where you can make Manchego cheese. And so that's where Maria and her farm is. And so this is the video that Maria created for us. And so this is her farm. And while we're watching the video and letting it play, a lot of it is they actually just had a lot of new baby sheep that were recently born. So she really highlighted all the new baby sheep that were just born, as you can see, like just born. But while we're watching the video, if you have any questions about it, please shout. But let's taste the cheese, because that's obviously the most important part. So typically, when you get an industrial Manchego, oftentimes you'll find it to be a bit dry and a bit rubbery. Honestly, Manchegos we get asked for Manchegos a lot from customers as cheesemongers. And for many, many years, we weren't really excited to sell Manchego. And then this cheese came along. And sheep's milk is unique in that out of the three main milk types, cow, sheep, and goat, sheep's milk has the highest fat content. And you really, by having a beautiful quality raw milk, sheep's milk cheese, she's able to maintain the moisture level of this cheese much better than any commercial industrial size Manchego that I've had. And so what you really want is when you eat the Manchego, obviously, we like to give it a nice smell first. The richness and the fattiness should really coat your palate. But what blew me away about her Manchego, oh, and in this video, This is a wonderful cheese they make for us called Cerro del Angel, where they take a sheep's milk cheese and they coat it in dried flower petals. Really, really beautiful cheese and really, really wonderful. Also sheep's milk. The notes that I get from the manchego are a lot brighter, a lot more citrusy, but you still get the depth and the fattiness and the richness. And so when you think about, what did y'all think about it actually? Before we move on, what did y'all think about that manchego? Good? Awesome. Any questions about the video and some of the cheese making in there? Okay. So when you think about farmhouse cheeses and what it means to raise the animals, to milk the animals, and then to make the cheese, and in her case, she also ages the cheese on site, you have control over the process from start to finish. And the care and quality that you can put into that is really exceptional. But I don't want to talk too much longer because I'm actually very, very excited to move on to our next cheese and introduce you to the aged Bloomsday, which we're going to be trying next. And Mark Gillman, who is the cheesemaker of Cato Corner Farm and the cheesemaker of this wonderful cheese. And so very, very happy to have him here tonight. And Mark, I will let you take it away from here.
Thank you, Julia. It's great to be. Thank you for inviting me to join you tonight. We've been working with Formaggio Kitchen more than 20 years. I was trying to think when we first started, but I kind of cold called you in 1999 or 2000 or something like that. And it was long ago. There was no internet. I had to call information to get your number. And we've been working together for quite a long time. So it's thank you, and it's great to be here for this. Actually, I don't know if you want to pull up the slide of my mother and myself. My mom really started the farm. Elizabeth, here we go. Not the south of Spain, yeah. All right, there we go. All right, these are some of our cows. Yeah, so my mother started the farm, and actually we moved there in the 1970s, and she actually raised sheep for many years, sheep and goats. We did not make cheese commercially. We did make, she did make some goat's milk cheese just for us to eat. And the sheep were not milk sheep like the ones pictured in the previous video. They were like for meat and for wool, but it was never enough to kind of make a living. It's my mother's dream to have a farm for many years. So she decided that she wanted to go into making cheese as a way to have a sustainable small farm. So in the late 90s, she took out a small loan, bought some used equipment, and started making cheese with Jersey cow's milk. From milking about 13 cows. And she had grown up around cheese. She grew up in Providence, and there were a lot of good cheese shops there at the time. Some of them sort of classic Italian cheeses, but also there were some Southern New England cheddars back in the 50s, for example, that disappeared in the 70s as everything got much more industrialized. But so she had an appreciation for what cheese should taste like, and it had been a part of our family history and culture. So the holidays we would buy nice cheeses for each other and such. So it was sort of a natural step for her to take when she was looking for a way to have a farm that could support itself. So we right now milk about 45 Jersey cows. So Jerseys are a small brown cow. Maybe we could switch to the next slide there. You can see some of the Jerseys. So this is Harp in the field, the border collie, with Io, one of the cows. Now we use Jerseys they're smaller, much smaller than Holsteins. They give much less milk, but it's very high quality milk. It's very rich. It has a lot of protein and butter fat. Has a wonderful flavor as well. Jerseys are very, very sweet animals to work with. We raise ours by hand since they're babies, and so they're very comfortable with people, and get a lot of individualized attention. You might be able to see in this picture that the cows all have names, and the names are actually on their right hind foot. You can see a little ankle band there, and also around on a necklace around their neck. So when they're in the milking parlor, people can tell, that which cow they're milking, and they can check it off. And then we have lots of little notes about each one, what she might need that's different or special from the others at that point in time. Obviously, one of the themes tonight is farmstead cheese, farmhouse cheese. So all of our milk comes from our farm. We like to say that we have, we're supervising the process from pasture to palate. So it's milk, good milk, good cheese starts with good milk, and for us, we think that comes from happy and healthy cows. And so what those cows are eating is really important. That they have a comfortable, relaxed lifestyle with good fresh grass, and then that's going to help give us nice sweet milk, and that's going to help set the groundwork for good cheese. Almost everything we make, including the aged Bloomsday that you have there, is raw milk, and it's certainly there are parts of the world where you can combine milk and make a raw milk cheese, but generally speaking, an advantage of a farmhouse cheese is that it allows you, because you have so much control over the quality of that milk, it makes it much easier to make a raw cheese that's going to kind of celebrate all of the flavors, all of the microorganisms that are in the milk. In raw cheese, the cows are picking up anything that they're picking up from the grass that has the potential to contribute flavor to the cheese itself. So I often find that even mild raw milk cheeses are going to have a lot more depth than a pasteurized cheese. Now the aged Bloomsday that you have is that one's about 10 months old right now, and so it's a little bit drier. It's to me, I taste. Actually, sometimes people compare it a little bit to a sort of medium-aged Manchego with some hints of cheddar thrown in there as well. So I think we get a little bit of that, a little bit of cheddary acidity on the finish, but that should be balanced by a little bit of a sweetness as well. Now, some of the pictures that you see, so this is actually what the Bloomsday curd looks like when we're making it. So it's a relatively small curd. One of the main variables in cheese making is the size of the cheese curd. So a softer cheese like a blue cheese or a camembert, for example, is going to have a very large curd, whereas a drier aged cheese is going to have a fairly small curd. Now, just the quick video that she showed us from Spain, it was clear that the Manchego curd was actually significantly smaller than this curd that we're using here for the aged Bloomsday. But those metal wheels on the table hold about 25 pounds, so that's what we would have made the aged Bloomsday in that shape. In the back of the table, you'll see some smaller wheels, and actually we make a younger version of this cheese that we call Bloomsday, and that one we tend to sell at about 4 or 6 months. So it's the same curd. It's just a question of how long it ages. We do actually the aging ourselves. I apologize to Julia, I didn't send a picture of our cheese cave. We did send a lot of pictures of cows, so there you can see the jerseys walking through the field. Now we use rotational grazing. So in this case, they're walking in a little alley along the edge of this field because we're not letting them in the whole field at one time. We let them, we subdivide the field so they'll spend about 12 hours in each paddock. And then after the next milking, they move on to the next paddock. And then by the time they come back around, maybe about 3 weeks later, the grass has grown back. We feed local hay in the winter. We don't have a large enough farm to make our own hay, but we buy from several local farmers around us. We do not feed any fermented feed, no silage. And that's actually, we are following a lot of the sort of European traditions for that. A lot of, some of the cheeses where there are actually sort of specific rules in France say about how the cheese can be made. It'll say no fermented feeds. And part of the reason is it affects the flavor. So the dry hay is going to have a much better flavor, much more like what you're getting from the grass, and especially in a raw aged cheese, the flavor of the milk is so critical. One thing that we do notice with our cheeses, and I think Julia's probably noticed this, and anyone who's selling our cheese will notice that there is some seasonal variation. I mean, that's part of the beauty of making cheese by hand in this way, is that you can see how it changes throughout the year. So for example, when the cows are out on grass, the milk has a really nice flavor that comes from the grass, but it tends to be not quite as rich. In the winter, there's not quite as much of that of that distinctive grassy flavor, but it's very high in protein and butterfat in the winter. And so that some of our cheeses, Formaggio has been selling our Hooligan for many, many years. So the Hooligan with the winter milk is just lovely because it's supposed to be really soft and supple and kind of stinky. So it does quite well with that winter milk. But yeah, I mean, I feel like for us, it's a whole. It all starts with a farm. I feel like if there's anything that I would love you to take away from tonight, it's like that it the cheese began with the cows, began with the grass, and our ability to sort of work with the animals and take care of them, and we have a wonderful staff that really helps with that. That's what allows us to make a cheese that we're quite proud of. So I don't know if Julia, if there are questions you'd like me to touch upon, or I'd also be happy to open it up to the group.
Yeah, no, I think first of all, thank you so much for coming. And this is my dog. Every time I turn my mute off, my dog likes to be very loud and start whining. So Mark, actually, as cheesemongers, we're not allowed to have favorite cheeses. But it's funny, it took me about 15 or 16 years, but one of his young cheeses, the Hooligan, I finally kind of was like, you know what, this is my favorite cheese of all time. It's just, he's an incredibly talented cheesemaker. And what I've always realized about his cheeses is the milk quality. Because that cheese is a young cheese that really highlights the sweetness of the milk. And what I found about farmhouse cheeses where the folks doing the animal husbandry, the milking, you see a noted difference because, again, everything starts with the milk, and what the animals eat is so incredible and has such an incredible influence and impact on the final cheese. And so, Mark, I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of what you found, kind of if you ever thought about, a lot of times, sometimes cheesemakers tend to have their eyes on bigger. But for you, it seems like tradition is the priority and the sort of sustainability of what you and your mom have created. I would just love to hear a little bit more about kind of where you see the farm being in, the next 10, 20 years and kind of what your goals are.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it is something we think about and talk about a lot. And actually, for us, I mean, our farm is relatively small in the sense that we have it's 75 acres, but about half of that is pasture. So, about 37 or so acres of grass. We have a neighbor we lease some land from, but our infrastructure is fairly small. And so we don't see an opportunity for us to add a lot of animals to our own herd. But at the same time, our expenses keep going up, and some of it's because we have actually some people who have worked for us for almost 20 years, which is wonderful. They're almost part of the family, and respectfully, we try to give them raises every year. So things like that. I mean, the labor goes up, fee goes up. There's only so much we can keep passing on those costs to Formaggio, but it's. So we certainly asked the question too, how could we, how can we expand our business a little bit? And one of the things that we have started to do a little bit is to buy a small amount of milk from some neighboring farms. And for that, we're actually making a young pasteurized cheese. So we just sent a few cases of our Celeste up to you for the first time. That's a small format lactic bloomy rind that ages about 2 weeks. So our approach there has been, the raw cheeses have to age for 2 months. They have to age for 60 days. And that is that's going to celebrate our milk. And that's going to really show what we can do by taking care of our own herd, our own animals. But we have an opportunity to work with some other small farms in the area and buy some of their milk. And for that, we would choose to make something that was pasteurized and younger. Now, the question of the milk quality, though, is a difficult one. I mean, it's very hard to find farms that are not feeding silage, for example. And dairy farms, Connecticut now has fewer than 100 dairy farms. And even when we started making cheese, there were probably twice that many. So there's consolidation even in a small state like Connecticut. And so what that means is a lot of these farms are milking, 600 cows, and they don't go outside. They never see the light of day. So I'm not interested in buying milk from somebody like that. I want to buy milk where the cows are also going on pasture and living a good life. So it's actually not as easy as we thought it might be. So we're still sort of trying to think about we have one small farm we work with very similar values to us, but they also make their own yogurt, and right now they don't have much extra milk. So we're looking at other alternatives as well to help kind of slowly grow what we're doing, but in keeping with our particular values.
And I think what you made a point is so valuable for consumers to understand, which is, how much time goes into making cheese, how many months go into aged Bloomsday before you can actually sell it to the consumer. And not only is it time, but as that cheese ages, it loses weight.
Right.
And as we know, weight is money in the
Right.
industry of cheese. And so it really is, it's becoming more and more rare to find cheesemakers who are going through every step of the way, especially the aging process. That level of commitment to the start to the finish is just, just something that we don't see as much of, and it's understandable, but it really does impact the quality. And I imagine it's somewhat like, sending a child off to college when you finally send the aged Bloomsday away. So
unfortunately, we make another batch every week. So, well, no, it's one thing I was thinking about your observation just about the so the aging and the weight loss. I mean, I imagine most of the cheeses that are on your counter are going to be natural rind cheeses. I mean, so that's a big difference between a smaller production or artisan made cheese and an industrial cheese. Is typically industrial cheese would be vacuum sealed, cryovac, and so that's not going to lose that weight. I mean, that's part of what but it's not going to develop the flavor in the same way. There's the natural rinds there's air exchange from the cheese into the cave environment onto the wooden boards it's aging on, through the molds that are growing on the surface, and that's going to contribute a depth of flavor to the cheese. So that's an integral part of the process. And I like to say the cheese is made in the vat. So what we're doing in the cheese making room is that's it starts with the milk, but then what we do with the milk is going to set the stage for that particular recipe. Then we put in the cave where it's 55 degrees, high humidity, and we on wooden boards, we turn it regularly, and that's going to sort of help to kind of finish it, to develop that, allow that flavor to develop. But if we haven't made a good cheese in the to begin with, if our milk wasn't good quality milk, didn't taste good, wasn't clean, whatever the issue was, and we didn't do a good job with the make, that doesn't matter what you do in the cave, nothing's gonna redeem it. So
yeah. Awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Mark?
What wine would you pair with this, Mark?
Actually, you can go two ways with that. We just actually I'm preparing for a tasting of the local vineyard here, and so earlier this week we were sampling it, and we actually had it with a bubbly Viognier. So it was a drier, a sweeter but bubbly wine. I mean, bubblies are actually good with a lot of cheese. You can do a lot with bubbly. But I've also paired it with like a Petit Syrah, like a fuller bodied red. I feel like the challenge with red can be if there's too much tannin, it's going to fight the cheese. But if it's a little rounded, a little softer, then it's going to go well. And I think aged Bloomsday can stand up to something like a Petit Syrah, for example.
Cool, thanks. Great cheese.
Thank you. It's good with beer too. I mean, I like it with like a chocolate stout or even an IPA. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this cheese with a hard cider too.
Sure.
One of my favorites. Does anybody else have any questions? Nope.
I had a question about curd size. You said that your curds were much larger than the curds in the Spanish cheese when you looked at the video. determines curd size?
So can we go, is it possible to pull up our cheese vat picture at all? Can you get back to that easily or not?
I can, yeah.
So when you make cheese, I mean, cheese, it starts with milk, and then the cheesemaker adds cultures and rennet. So rennet is going to coagulate the milk, and it's going to set, within a short period of time, maybe. All right. So
it's right here.
Yeah, I mean, we don't actually, doesn't have the stirrers and cutters there, but we can leave that one up for a minute. So the rennet is, once we add the rennet, this entire vat here is going to look like it has yogurt in it. It's going to be, sort of a gel about the consistency of yogurt. And we let it, so we let it sit for about anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes, depending on the cheese, for that gel to fully set up. And we can test how it's developing as a point at which called flocculation, at which it moves from being a liquid to being a gel. It's actually quite beautiful to see. But then that's the sort of beginning of the process. About, still another 30 minutes later or so, it's actually ready to cut. So when we cut it, that little arm that's up at the top there, it's Chris in the green shirt leaning over. Right above his head, you can see sort of a mechanical arm coming out. And on that arm, we can hook up some cutters, and the cutters move in a pattern around the vat and cut it into smaller pieces. Now, mind you, this is actually this room here we built in 2020. So for more than 20 years, we had a very small room with an old cheddar vat, and we did everything by hand. We cut it by hand, we stirred it by hand. And so it was handmade cheese 100% of the way. Now this, we were very happy to have expand our plant a little bit in 2020. Have this room, which is first a delight to work in. It's well lit. We can look out and see the cows in the field. It's a beautiful place to work. But we also don't have to do things like stir it for 2 hours ourselves. We can hook up the paddles, and it will do some stirring for us while we work. But so anyway, how long you let that, if you're doing it manually, you would choose between using cutters that were maybe 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 an inch or an inch. I mean, you can sort of select your size of how big you want that curd to be. In the case of, because we're using these as automatic stirrers, mostly about how long we let it run. We just do it for a few minutes, or do we do it for 15 minutes, say, for example. So that's one of your choices as a cheesemaker. You have to decide, how small do I want this curd. Some cheeses like Camembert, you might not cut it all. You might just ladle it, take it off, and put it right into the form. So that's going to have a lot of liquid, and it's going to drain slowly through.
Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome. Any other questions? Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm going to stay on and watch all your other cheeses too. So.
All right. So next up, we're going to do the pitchfork cheddar. So this is a classic cloth-bound cheddar from Somerset in the UK. This is a really special cheddar. This is made by brothers, Welsh brothers, Todd and Magan Trethowan. And they actually started their cheese making on their family farm in Wales. And let me pull up, we're going to go back to our slides so you can see a little bit about these brothers. So I had the pleasure, so these are some of their cows. So this is where they originally started making cheese. They started actually by making a very, very traditional Welsh cheese called Carefully. It was Gorwith Carefully. I learned the proper Welsh pronunciation of it. It's spelled like Gorwyd, but you have to say Gorwith. The brothers visited us in Boston. Gosh, probably in like 2010, I think. And, I learned what it was like to go out with two Welsh brothers, and I've never been out later in my entire life. But what was most fascinating was the next morning, we were all bright and early up tasting cheese, and talking to the brothers about their cheese making technique was fascinating because that's one of the questions that I ask every cheesemaker. I'm a meticulous note taker. That's how I like to learn and remember things. So I always love to understand cheesemakers and what their style is of retention. And because as you've heard from Mark, there's so many different directions to go in when you're making a cheese. And so the brothers were talking about, were showing us some of their notes. Because I said, how do you track this one? You make one single cheese all year round. This is the only cheese you've ever made. How do you track? And they track everything from the temperature of the day to is it cloudy, is it sunny, what the humidity outside is, what flowers are blossoming in the field where their cows are grazing. And it just was astonishing the level of detail that they were recording. And that way, when, 9 months down the road, 12 months down the road, when they were tasting these finished wheels, and they had an extraordinary wheel, they could look back and try to find consistencies. And I asked them, I said, you make one cheese, would you ever branch out and try another? And they both said no. And that was funny because then in 2014, they moved to Somerset, which is right down here, which is kind of the home of cheddar making. And they wanted to keep the same traditional principles of the farm that they grew up on. And they had met a friend and a fellow cheesemaker in Somerset and learned how to make cheddar from this cheesemaker. And so they decided because, when they were in Wales, they were making a traditional Welsh cheese. Of course, they continued the tradition at their new farm to make a new cheese or to make their Welsh cheese, but they also added this cheddar to their collection of 2 cheeses now. And so they make a cheese called pitchfork cheddar. And so these are the brothers. And this is the pitchfork cheddar that they're making. And pitchfork cheddar is a classic. The name for the UK uses farmhouse as the term for a cheesemaker who is raising the animals and milking the animals and making the cheese on site. Now, just to be aware, there's actually no sort of legal classification for that name. So farmhouse and farmstead in the UK don't really have any regulations associated with them, but that is sort of traditionally what the term refers to. And obviously in this case, with the brothers that we know so well, they are doing it the traditional way. And they actually named the cheese Pitchfork after a classic tool, a pitchfork used to cut the curd to make these cheddars. And so this is actually a process after. So you've seen some of the process with Mark's photos of the vat filled with the cheese curd, but it also still had all the whey. The process of cheddaring is a very unique process where you actually cut the curd quite finely and you stack it into these blocks, and you continue to stack the cheeses and cut the curd and stack the cheeses and cut the curd. And what this does is it enables the cheese to expel a good deal of moisture. And when you have a really traditional cheddar, you end up with a really crumbly, and let's actually just take a look at our cheddar. You can see if you hold up the cheese to the light, you can actually see the formation of the curd. And if you start to crumble it and break it, I just very gently kind of pull it apart. You see how it doesn't pull apart in a straight line? It's kind of scraggly. That is basically following the natural lines of the curd. And that's what you get out of a really beautiful natural cheddar. And so in the case of this cheddar, this is the size. It's sort of a classic UK cheddar shape, and they actually do wrap it in muslin cloth and lard it. And the larding of it helps to seal in the cheese. it doesn't actually impact the flavor of the cheese at all, but what it does is it protects the cheese and seals in some of the seals up the cloth that it's been wrapped in. But the cloth is incredibly important because the cloth still enables the cheese to breathe, and because they are aging it in caves on their farm as well, it's very, very important to allow the cheese to ripen in an environment where it can absorb the qualities of the cave and the basically all of the microbes that are in the air. So they do a very traditional cheese making. They're very traditional. They love sort of the historical elements of their family cheese making. And so this is their cheese press. And so all the different stacks that you can see are different wheels of cheese. And they have their old-fashioned press, which actually presses more whey out of the cheese, again, to help to further expel moisture. And so when you think about, I think we're going to move on to the Gouda soon, but I deep dove into this month's subject matter of farmhouse cheeses, because what's fascinating is that every little area of the world really does have a different designation for what farmhouse means. So in France, it's fermier. And it's controlled to a certain extent. There are certain name protected cheeses that if they are denoted fermier, they have to be made only using milk owned by the cheesemakers. But when you think about that, but they don't have to also age the cheese. When you think about the distinction of you must own the animals and make the cheese, that doesn't limit size. So there are some, in last month's Voyage Fromage, we tried Tome de Fermier, Tome de Savoie Fermier, which was, a woman with 30 cows, milking and making her cheese and aging her cheese all on her little farm. But there are also Fermier cheeses that are massive. And so I think, in talking to the sellers at Jasper Hill, they actually own a herd of cows and they make several raw milk cheeses with their herd of cows. But because the milk travels 15 miles from the farm to where the cheese is made, they don't consider it farmhouse because they feel like the milk is traveling too far. And that's something that I, again, also deep dived into because I was fascinated about the idea of the physical movement of milk. How does that affect the fat solids? You look at sort of homogenized milk, which obviously if you're trucking milk, you're not homogenizing it, but you are jostling it. You're breaking up those fat solids and you're starting that sort of process of homogenization, which is actually desirable for some cheeses, oftentimes younger cheeses, but not necessarily true of older cheeses. And I think what it shows you more than anything is control. If you are milking the animals on site, and the one word that Sophie, the maker of Tome de Savoie Fermier, kept using over and over again is gentle, of how gentle she was with the milk. And I think that's really, really impactful because you have a lot more control. And oftentimes, again, we think about spoilage when we think about moving milk. But, we have obviously some really brilliant modern technologies when it comes to spoilage. But you can't control the actual sort of chemical components of milk and fat solids and how the movement affects it. So I warned you in advance that Voyage Fromage was going to be a deep dive and that we were going to get nerdy together. So I hope you don't mind. But for me, that was, it was beyond just, there's obviously the romantic side of knowing the animals and understanding what they're eating, how they're grazing, their health, the quality, you know every aspect of what is going into that animal. And you also are helping to extract the milk from that animal, and you're gently bringing it to the vat. You're creating the cheese. You have control over every element, from the starter culture to the type of rennet that you're using. And then at that point, the curds and the wheys start to separate. And then you have the decision, how finely do I want to cut the curds? What size of cheese do I want to make? Do I want to press the cheese and expel more moisture? Do I want to, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Gouda and the style. I know we dug into a lot of curd talk, and I'm really glad that we did, because I think it's going to be really helpful to understand kind of the flavor profiles that you get from cheese. But I think when it comes down to it, it's control from start to finish. And I actually talk about this, it comes up in other areas of food as well, where if you really can control the process from start to finish, obviously you're in control of the steering wheel. And there's still a lot of unknowns when you're making cheese, and a lot of things that can pop up, but at least you can help create as many controls as possible in your arsenal. But I find the pitchfork cheddar, going back to the cheddar, to me, this epitomizes a really classic UK cheddar. Oftentimes when we think of cheddar, we think of sharpness and acidity and bite and age. This cheddar actually ideally is only aged about 13 to 15 months. And that's because it is allowed to breathe with that muslin cloth rather than being covered in wax. Wax cheddars, hell, you can throw them on a aging table for 10, 15 years, and they're actually not going to progress much because you're putting them in stasis. In this case, the cheese is evolving, it's living, it's really kind of absorbing the different qualities of the cave that it's in. But what do you think about that cheddar? Thumbs up? You can see the you saw what I was talking about when you're breaking it apart and you taste when you see the actual structure of the curd, and then when you're biting it, it's a very moist cheddar, which is actually why I love this cheddar so much. It tends to have a really nice high moisture content, which is fabulous. All right, so last cheese that we're going to talk about is the Borenkos, and I only have a couple of slides of the Borenkos, but so this cheese is the Borenkos Grand Cru, and Borenkos just also means farmer or farmhouse. And so again, Borenkos is actually an EU protected name. So Borenkos is unique in that it doesn't require 100% of the milk to be it does not require the cheese contain 100% of milk from the farmer. It's funny, when I was reading the EU sort of regulatory documents, it says most of the cheese has to be made with the milk of the farmer. So I found that a fascinating language. But this case, we have a wonderful farmhouse Gouda that is made from just north of Amsterdam, right up in this area where that hook is near Horn. And then, of course, a beautiful cow with the classic windmill in the back. But when we talk about Gouda, I want everybody to taste the Gouda. And so smell it. And I'd love to know people's thoughts on the main flavor difference that they taste between this and the previous cheese. If you could describe it in one word or a phrase, if that's easier. And I'm going to start calling on people. So Michael, you're up.
It's brighter,
Uh-huh.
almost really fruity.
Yes. The fruity is spot on. Do you get sort of
Really
like
pops.
you
Really
get like a
pops.
caramelized quality to it?
Yeah.
So going back to the curd, because it always comes back to the curd. Gouda is very unique in how it's made because there's actually a process. So you remember Mark's vat of curd that had curd and whey in it. So you have the curd and the whey, and the curd is broken up into, say, like pea-sized pieces. At this point, to make Gouda, what they do is they actually drain off a portion of the whey, so the liquid portion, because the milk turns into the two parts. Once you add the rennet and the starter culture, you end up with curd and whey. So you drain off a portion of the whey. And I don't say a specific amount because that actually depends on the type of animal, breed of cow that the milk is from, because they have different sort of, each breed has very, very different milk qualities. So you drain off a portion of that whey, and then you actually wash the curd. And what that means is you pour hot water on top of that curd, and you are further washing off and diluting that whey. And then you're continuing the cheese making process and the removal of moisture. But what that washing of the curd does is it actually removes a great deal of lactose from essentially the cheese that you are in the process of making, because you're washing away a lot of lactose that was present in that curd. Now, the bacteria that is thriving and growing and loving that environment thrives on lactose, and what it does is it actually converts that lactose into lactic acid. And so by depriving that bacteria of that lactic acid, you're minimizing the acidity of the cheese and enhancing the sweetness of the cheese. And so you're basically taking control of it to affect the level of acidity and lactic acids that is created. And that's actually true of cheddar too, where you introduce, and this is way too much of a deep dive that I will not get into, but different starter cultures, which you use at the very, very beginning when you're introducing that to your milk, can produce different levels of acidity in your cheese. So with cheddars, they frequently lean towards starter cultures that produce higher levels of acidity. And that's part of the reason why you have a lot of those terms like sharp and tangy used to describe things like cheddar. But that's where you get that sort of sweet, caramelly rich flavor profile in this Gouda. And boring cost Goudas are very, Gouda became very industrialized. They say, in doing a little bit of research on the washing of the curd and where that originated, it didn't originate from for a flavor profile. It actually originated for storage practices. It was one of the first cheeses that was a much larger format. And so it created a curd that was a little bit more rubbery and a bit drier, and it expelled more moisture, and that prevented what they called in my very old-timey cheese book, cheese rot. And so the center of the cheese basically would way back in the olden days was more susceptible to cheese rot, as they said, if you did not expel enough moisture from the cheese during the make process. And so this was a technique that they formed to be able to have stable, sustainable, large wheels of cheese. And that's how they were able to kind of start the sort of, I don't want to say industrialization of Gouda, but in a lot of ways, Gouda has become very industrialized. So for us, it became really important to find smaller producers of Gouda. And we're actually just about to book tickets to Belgium to go seek out some more Goudas, because again, it's the relationships, because, you know, it's these farmers, you know, sometimes we've had many farmers retire, and, you know, they don't always have kids to take their place. And so it's really important for us to constantly visit and travel and try to find people who are doing what we find important. But last but not least, I'm going to quickly talk about the condiment that was included in your bundle. Did everybody get the jar of jam? So realistically, I should not have sent this jam because it is one of the most limited jams, one of the most limited products we have in the store, but it was perfect for tonight's theme because this is made in the Ardèche in France. Sylvie makes it, and her husband Pascal grows all the fruit. I never have it's farmhouse jam, really. I get one order a year. I never have enough. I always run out. People always get angry at me when I run out, but there's only so much jam they can make. What makes it special, it's 2 ingredients, it's fruit and sugar. When you grow the fruit yourself, you can enable the fruit to ripen longer on the vine. And so you get more sugar content. And then she picks it in the morning and she makes the jam that day. And like this year, I didn't get any cherry from her because they had a bad cherry harvest. So it's not like she says, oh, I have to have cherry every year, so I'm going to ship a bunch of cherries in because my cherries didn't do well. She just says, sorry, too bad. You're not going to have cherry for a whole year. And that I love, because that is real farming, and you have to work with the ebbs and flows and sort of the sustainability of keeping a farm like that alive. It's an organic farm. They do beautiful, beautiful work. You'll find that it's a looser set, and that is because she doesn't use any pectin in it. It's naturally set just with a little bit of the sugar. So again, I couldn't not, because it was so representative of our theme, but I hope you enjoy it and understand how special her jams are. They're really fabulous, and I hope you love it. I really want to thank Mark for joining us tonight and sharing your expertise. I want to thank everyone for joining us for Voyage Fromage, with the exception of my very noisy dog. And she's just hoping to get some cheese out of this. Very, very excited. We're going to dig into Rennet next month, and we have a wonderful special guest from Jasper Hill. The following month, we're going to be taking a tour. We're going to be doing it either on a Saturday or a Sunday, because we're going to be taking a live tour of a cave in Bra, Italy, where we get our Parmesan from. So the whole goal of this, like I said, is to break down the barriers and give you access to the incredible producers like Mark, who make these products and cheeses. And it's a fabulous way to kind of see what goes into them and how special they are, and that every little bit of the process is really thought out and cared for. So thank you for nerding out with me tonight. I very, very appreciate it. And if you have any questions at all, for me or Mark, I can pass it along to Mark. My email is just julia@farmaggiokitchen.com. And again, thank you so much for supporting us. And if you have any questions, just let us know. And thank you again, Mark. Really appreciate